Welcome again. So the icon of the Indian woman, which is the central icon that has been used in the movie, you will find. If please watch this movie more than once. The icon of the Indian woman that you see is a very impressive and emotionally moving metaphor for the submission to the nation state. She is idealized as a collective will with an imagined morality. What do you mean by the collective will? That she represents the idea of a collective nation, a united nation, not a diverse nation, a united nation. She is the conscience keeper of the nation. So that it's a very impressive kind of an imagery that is the central imagery to the whole movie. That the role that is played by Nargis, she is the driving force behind this new reality of a new India, of a new society, of a new village. So you have to understand that in this concept. But now herein is the problematic part. What is this? This reality that we are talking about of the imagination is a highly ideological reality. It probably does not have much touch with reality itself. It's an ideological reality. So please make a difference between these two ideas. It's an ideological reality of what Nehru envisions the nation to be. It's not reality per se. So it's not what women were facing in their own village or society. It's not about the real condition of women probably, but it was more about what the ideological reality, the ideological situation of women should be or supposed to be as in context. So it is neither in touch with the with the reality of the largely economic, social and political exploitation of the Indian woman, which by the way I have talked about in the last lecture where I was talking about Catherine Mayo. So this representation of the Indian woman, the Mother India per se, is probably not in touch with that reality, the really horrible situation of the Indian women, the kind of trauma that the condition of an Indian woman would face during those times. So you have to understand that reality and the ideological reality don't match. So nor does this movie actually sympathize in any way with the real plight of peasants. So we are not talking about the real plights of peasants. We are talking about the ideological scenario of what peasants are supposed to contribute to the new nation. How are they supposed to contribute to this new nation? So Mother India, in a way, also you might argue, you might criticize in a way that it obscures real life, it hides reality, it hides the real situations of farmers, women, peasants, workers. The depiction, the representation might not be what the reality was supposed to be in the 1940s and the early 1950s. But this is exactly again how modern nationalist myths work. Nationalist myths are created out of this sheer hiding of realities because you are trying to show a better future, the visionary future, the ideological future which Nehru was hoping, dreaming of as a prime minister. So this nationalist myth of Mother India is negotiated in a given historical moment of a society and culture in the context of the late 1940s and 50s project of a national Indian cinema. So there is this negotiation, the political negotiation happening between this, the moment, historical moment of this, what real society's situation was, and how you imagine society to be. So this negotiation, through this negotiation, we arrive at the idea of an Indian national cinema in this decade of the 1950s, and people like Mehboob Khan, Bimal Roy, such kind of filmmakers actually contributed largely to this kind of a cinema which negotiates between the imagined reality of the future and to the present realities of society, and they take a political stand somewhere in between the two. So you have to understand this negotiation that is happening with the cinema during this phase. Let me come now to the cinema as an industry. Now, in 1949, the Film Inquiry Committee was set up. Now, this was commissioned by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. So, this committee was going to look into the problems, issues, and the prospects of the Indian film industry. So, because the Indian film industry was, of course, a privately organized industry. So, the committee submitted its report, and it appealed to Indian producers and directors to cooperate with the government. Now, cooperate with what? To share the responsibility of nation building. So, this was a very open appeal. It was a what you would say, it was a way in which the government was saying that filmmakers should contribute to the concept of the nation in their own way by making films, films which would represent the idealized, imagined nation, new nation. The report that actually talks about cinema as an effective instrument. So please see those quoted texts. This is directly from those report. Cinema as an effective instrument for national culture. So we hear this word, the national culture. So we are already beginning to talk about the idea of the nation, a large nation. You can understand India at 1950s. Education and healthy entertainment to promote and further induce a national character with its multifaceted aspects. So it was an open call to the filmmakers to become instruments of change, instruments of creating a national culture. If at all there was something called a national culture, they wanted it to be an educational and healthy, they use the word healthy entertainment, which would promote and induce a national character. And thus you could see in this report that they were talking about homogeneity, they're talking about oneness, they're talking about a kind of converging towards a common goal. So cinema's path was almost laid out by this government report in the Film Inquiry Committee report. So the idea of Indianness also had other connotations. For example, public morality, so which has also been dealt with by dealt by the committee. So public morality, cinema was to actually confirm to this Indian state's idea to what would constitute the idea of Indianness. So morality would be a big idea in these films. So Indianness in post-colonial India was equally defined through the so-called national epics. So these ideas of Indianness would be defined in terms of also the past, the epics. So you see, morality formed a very important point of debate during the era of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. So you have to take this idea of the film committee report in that context. So what is Nehru saying? Nehru actually penned that, as I had already mentioned, Nehru penned this book when he was already in jail because of his anti-British activities. Now this is important. So what was he talking about in this book? The basic premise of the book was that he was laying forth the foundations. He was talking about the concept of a superior Indian civilization. So the Oriental was superior to the Occidental. That was what his idea was all about. So he was laying the arguments in this favor of how the Indian culture was very superior. The Indian past was a very rich past. How Indians have been staying together. How the Indian civilization was a binding force, because like Indian civilization is a civilization which is unbroken, which is continued for thousands of years. So he talks about this glorious past, and he talks about how this glorious past can take us to a brighter future. So he attributes a common past. Now this is interesting. He attributes a common past to all the different cultures of the subcontinent, and from this he constructs this common dream. So he converges ideas and dreams and identity into a homogeneous one. So that's what I understand by the idea of a convergence of identities. So Nehru does it masterfully in this epic of his, which is called The Discovery of India. So he was the one who was constructing this idea of an Indian national culture in his book already. He was talking about this Indianness, the idea of, if at all there is something called Indian national culture. So Nehru's construction of this Indian culture ultimately also, actually, he falls for that trap with which most European Indologists and philosophers fell for when they were discussing the Orient. Because he falls for those interpretations of one Indian culture and one nation. So his construction is also has to be looked at from this critical lens. Thus, when I have laid out to you this concept of the Indian culture that traces its roots to also discovery of India, you have to understand the Indian national cinema from that perspective. So Indian national cinema is not out of this debate. So Indian's national cinema also is a part of this complex chain of constructed Indian culture, and Nehru plays a big role in that. And all these early filmmakers that we have been talking about, like Mehboob Khan, Bimal Roy and all, they also formed part of this complex narrative. They become people who actually contribute to this so-called national cinema that Nehru had envisioned, so-called national identity, national culture. So this homogeneity starts to appear on the horizon during this period in Indian national cinema.